welcome to everybody. Good to see new faces. We have some new members in the audience, too. I've seen their names, but not their faces yet. I'm Bonnie Rosenthal, and I'm president of Save Our Seminary. And today, we're going to introduce you to some of the other board members of Save Our Seminary, and they're going to tell you about some of the programs and activities that are going on in our group and what we're doing right now about this historic site, which is the National Park Seminary Historic District. The program for today we called a show and tell. Just like when we were kids in school, the teacher said, okay, tell. I'm going to call up some board members and let them tell you and show you some of the things they're doing. I'm going to give you a quick little history of this site for those of you who don't know. The original building, the Forest Inn, was built as a hotel in 1887, which was where you probably came in the back door today from the parking lot in the back. The room you're in now, the ballroom, was an addition put in 1927, right? Historians. But the hotel did not flourish. In 1894, it was not doing well. And then a couple called John and Vesta Cassidy came in and bought the hotel and turned it into a girls' school, which we know today, or describe it perhaps as a finishing school. And it was a private school for girls only. It was a school then until 1942. In the early 30s, it became an official college or a junior college for women to keep up with the change in women's education and to change it to more practical-oriented type of courses. 1942, the school was still active and still flourishing, but the Army needed recuperation and hospital space for the returning World War II veterans. So the Army took over this spot, this whole area. And the Army owns it to this day. So the Army has owned it for, 51 years now. In 1972, this historic buildings were put on the National Register of Historic Places. And in 1992, the Army decided that this historic district was no longer necessary for their use, and they decided to find a new user. They are now in the process of doing that, finding a new user, and that involves a lot of studies, environmental studies, and all kinds of things. We are involved in some of those procedures. And of course, as a lot of you might be in the surrounding community, you're probably concerned about what's going to happen here, and so are we. So what's happening now is the Army is in the process of finding a new user, not actively so at this point because they have a lot of preliminary studies to do. But in the meantime, they are leaving some of these buildings. Most of the buildings are empty other than this main building that we're in, still used for office space. There has not been any hospital use since the Vietnam era. But what we're going to do is I'm going to introduce each of our speakers about the particular topics that they are going to be discussing. And then afterwards, and even along the way, please feel free to ask questions. And afterwards, we do have some display materials, pictures, some newspaper articles about some of the things that have been going on. We have refreshments later. We may take a break, or if we can get through the whole program. But first of all, I'd like to start with Linda Lyons, who is our Save Our Seminary treasurer, also an architectural historian. And she is heading up the study of the sculpture here on the site. If any of you are familiar, there's a number of pieces of outdoor sculpture on the property. Unfortunately, only half of that has survived. There were twice as many pieces at the time of the school. But Linda can tell you about what we're doing with the sculpture. Linda?
Just realized that I'm not familiar with this machine, so excuse me if we don't get it working immediately. We'll show the slides. I'd like to say just a little bit about the national project that we are participating in. And I do have a folder of information that you can look at. A national organization, Save Outdoor Sculpture, which alas has the same initials we do, but they use an exclamation point, has determined to survey outdoor sculpture throughout the nation, realizing that there's very little information, there's no central source of reference for this material, and so many towns and communities do have such an interesting variety of outdoor sculpture, both commemorative sculpture and other types. Volunteers have been recruited throughout the country. All of the information will be transferred to a central repository in Washington at the National Museum of American Art, where a database will be available. I think that should be very helpful for any community or organization that wants to research outdoor sculpture in the future. Our SOS, Save Our Seminary, has volunteered to provide the survey information for the sculpture on the site. So that will be, and we report to the Maryland office, which in turn transfers it to the national office right nearby in Washington. So that's a folder that you can look at later. So I'd like to, what we are basically doing is we are using a survey form, a standard survey form, and writing a detailed description of each sculpture, including its current condition and what we know or can discover about the history of the piece, and transferring that all, including contemporary photographs. And primarily what I'm going to show you today are the slides that we've been making of the sculptures and tell you a little bit about them. Now, how do we turn this on? Let's start. But I don't know about the focus. All right, well, we're going to start right at the heart of the campus at our fountain. And I should say that all of these brand new slides, and we will be providing a copy of each to the national organization, are photographs taken by Godfrey Frankel, who's a member who is out of town today. But although he worked in a government office for his career, he has always been a photographer, and he has had exhibitions in Washington, and he is working on a book with Smithsonian of photographs that he took in the 1940s when he first arrived in Washington. Might that be the 1930s? In earlier days in Washington. So we are really delighted to have him with us working on this project. This fountain, I think I can show you, first of all, that's very nice, from this earlier photograph. And I think one of the things we're realizing is we probably do need to make more slides of early photographs so that we can give a more complete talk. First of all, you can see has lost several of its parts. The fountain today really only comes up to this level, but there's a whole section here that was in place, I believe, until certainly after World War II, and I think perhaps through the Korean War in the 60s. I think you can see another piece that's missing is the head of one of the horses. It's all of this information will be transferred to the national organization and will be of great use, I think, to anyone who in the future wants to restore the material, restore the piece, and have as complete a record as possible. And that's one more view of the sculpture. Not many of our surveys, we have a team that is out surveying, have come in yet. So I actually can't tell you a great deal more at this point about the materials and that sort of thing. Okay. This is a snapshot I took recently in Florida where I noted a fountain that's quite similar. I'm sorry, it's going to be difficult to see, but it is supported by 3 horses. I thought perhaps it was more similar, but looking at the slides, I realized it wasn't. The fountain sits in the center of DeWitt Circle out in front of this building. On the circle also we find these 2 very handsome lions, which are, I think, very well known to regular visitors of the campus. And they are hollow metal sculptures. We have found a foundry mark, but not any kind of sculptor's mark, and we will try to get a little more information. I think also once the database starts to be put together, even when we have such information as the foundry mark, in other words, the company that made these sculptures, we might be able to go to the database and get more information about the foundry and perhaps somehow track these sculptures back to their original plan and design. And I'm sure you all notice the windmill behind us. Another view of the Lions. So we're taking a little walk around the campus to see the sculptures. Joan of Arc is one that is very well known to visitors to the campus. And we do know in this case that this is a copy, well, we know two things about this sculpture. It is a copy of a French sculpture from the 19th century by Henri Chaput, who was a very prominent teacher in Paris in the late 19th century, and at the Académie Julienne, which was another school like the École des Beaux-Arts that trained students from all over the world in Paris. We do also know that this particular piece was made in a foundry in Boston. Again, we would be very interested to try to get some more information about why the choice was made to have this particular copy and how it came to be here. I should also point out, although I think it doesn't really count as outdoor sculpture, remind you that many classes planted ivy from various locations. This is a plaque that commemorates an ivy planting from 1923, for example. And there are a number of other plaques around the campus. Another view. Okay. A very fine sculpture that I know many of you are familiar with, which is known as the Death of Actaeon. I should say also, I also have out here a booklet of basically copies of older views of the sculptures from early view books and guides to the National Park Seminary. And there are many captions here that tell something about some of these sculptures. So that is something to be looked at, that you might want to look at later also. It's also known, I'm sorry, in this particular caption, it's called The Grief of Actaeon, and tells the story, there are a number of versions of the story of Actaeon, that he was a great admirer of the goddess Diana, and he was also a great hunter, and shot a doe one morning, and realized that by mistake he had killed the goddess Diana in the form of the doe. There are several versions of this story. I think this isn't always the way it's told, but would certainly explain what we see, which is the grieving young man, the dead doe or fawn, and it's around the other side of the sculpture is a sheaf of arrows. Many of you may know, if you know the history, that this sculpture stood at essentially the beginning of the footpath to the train station in Forest Glen, and that students who had reached this sculpture and saw the train going knew that they had, oh no, I've missed the train, and suggested that the grief shown here might relate to missing the train. Here's another view. Okay, we're coming around now to the back of the main building to what is popularly known as the Porch of the Maidens, on the front of a building known as Aloha. It was originally built as the home of the president of the seminary, and then later when another president's house was constructed, connected to the main building, this became a dormitory. It was eventually connected by a walkway to other parts of the campus. The maidens that hold this up, again, are something we want to know more about. Here's a view of a single one. They seem to have an Art Nouveau quality, I would say, with the flowing draperies. Clearly, I think, date from the end of the 19th century or beginning of the 20th century. We're very anxious to know a little bit more about them. I had hoped we have a slide, but we don't, of another kind of covered walkway which existed on the campus. And I do have a photograph in this book that you can look at afterward. But if you came around this far and went under the arch that says sorry, I'm in front of the picture, that says do not enter, but we all enter anyway off hours, to come into this back part. We know that there was another covered walkway, a three-part T-shaped covered walkway that connected Aloha to the gymnasium and connected that walkway, went across the gymnasium, essentially all the way down across what is now Linden Lane to the recitation hall, which no longer stands. And that had a very remarkable appearance. It was supported by another kind of maiden. I'd hoped we'd have that slide. And these maidens had a much more Greek look, as you can see. Although obviously they existed in multiples and I'm sure do represent late 19th or early 20th century copies. This one stands in the parking lot behind this building. If you park back there, you may have seen her. She's really buried in snow today, is often surrounded by construction equipment or whatever. Again, I would urge you to come up and look at this book and get a look at what that walkway looked like. It was quite distinctive. I think this is, of course, one of Godfrey's photographs. This is another view. And this is the only one that remains in the immediate vicinity of the main building. There is one other behind a house in Linden Lane, and we took a picture of her too. She wasn't in the same light, so she doesn't look quite the same. It is basically the same sculpture. The support on top of her head that supported the walkway, I think is a little more of it remains on this particular one. Okay, now we're continuing around, we're back to the Porch of the Maidens because we wanted to take a look at the lions at the stairs. Let's see if we can get another look. This one in particular reminds me a great deal of one of the lions at the entrance of the Corcoran Museum downtown. The other one, not as much. That face is a little different, at least the photographs I've had on hand to compare. But it is said that the ones at the Corcoran are copies of lions to be found in St. Peter's in Rome, on the tomb of one of the popes. So we will again try to pursue that lead and see where it takes us. And I should say, although we have a number of volunteers working on the project, if any of you are fascinated, we would be delighted to have you join our project. Okay, another lion, quite a few lions on the campus, as you can tell. This is to be found on Linden Lane in front of one of the latter-day buildings that were added in the Walter Reed days. And this one was one of a pair that originally stood on the other side of Linden Lane. Okay, now going along Linden Lane, heading towards some of the best known of the sorority houses, we have Hiawatha, as he is called. One thing we'd certainly like to find out is whether Hiawatha is the right name. Hiawatha, and I don't have a picture of it, stands next to what was typically called the Indian Mission. I read recently in one of the earlier catalogs that had originally been styled as a Spanish mission, but over the years, a number of Indian artifacts came to be associated with that particular sorority house, and that was very much at the behest of Mr. Fuchs, a Smithsonian official who was an expert on Indians who lived in Forest Glen Park. And so eventually this sculpture apparently was added to the ensemble. But this is, of course, I think one of the landmarks that you see on Linden Lane. Coming around to what we know as the Greek water carrier, heading essentially toward the pagoda from Linden Lane. Really doesn't show up well, I think, in this particular light. A very interesting sculpture. We would guess at this point, I think, again, turn of the century or a little later, a graceful, dance-inspired piece. I have participated in the survey of this. We didn't find any kind of marks that might help us identify a sculpture or a foundry, but we'll hope we'll come up with something. And coming around to the pagoda, our interest is primarily in these Japanese lanterns. The Japanese lanterns are not, certainly in Japan, these lanterns are everywhere. In fact, I do have a photograph of a trip that would indicate quite a few. In one Shinto shrine in Nara, which is the ancient capital of Japan, and this is actually Kasuga Shrine, And this type of lantern, some books say with the curved top, is called a Kasuga lantern. So clearly we have several here. It's our feeling that although these lanterns are quite common in Japan, they're pretty rare in the United States, especially in a setting like this, so that we should include them in the survey. I would also like to point out these two urns here, merely to say that we know they're not original to the spot, and we probably will not pay very much attention to them, but let me show you an earlier photograph of the pagoda. Sorry, I wish that would show up better. But there were two very beautiful ceramic vases here, and alas, they are gone. But I think you can see that the four lanterns have definitely been in that spot a long time. Here's a close-up of the urns that we know are not original. Also gives you another good view of the lanterns. What the urns are similar to is this one, which is at the porte cochere under the ballroom. If you continue down a little farther from the pagoda. Kay Fanning and I looked at that fairly closely, and we realized that it's cast stone, and therefore not particularly old, we don't think, although attractive, and we know from photographs it's been there a long time. Apparently it was called the trash barrel. We sort of think it was more of a font, or font-inspired piece from a Romanesque cathedral of earlier times in Europe. And I have spoken with someone who's researched some churches in the United States, and she says that this type of piece was very common and very popular in the 1920s. A lot of churches were built in that style, and many of these pieces and ensembles were turned out for decor. So that may explain where these pieces came from. If you continued on into the chateau, I'm sorry, this is hard to see too, into the chateau garden, in the old days, if you continued on past the ballroom into the chateau gardens, you would come across this sculpture known as the nymph and the faun. That's an F-A-U-N, or I think in one place called the satyr and the nymph, which might also fit. That has somehow ended up inside the main lobby, and you probably saw it this afternoon, or if you didn't, you can go back and see it. Even though this one is indoors now, we have decided to survey it, since perhaps at some point it will be put back in its original location. Also in the lobby is a lion, another lion that we know came from the castle, one of the other picturesque sorority houses on campus. And there's a third sculpture in the lobby, Andromeda in Chains, which as far as we can tell has always been inside. So we are surveying the lion and this one, but we are not surveying Andromeda, since we believe it was always an indoor sculpture. We'll get to the indoor sculptures in another project. Do I have anything else to show you? Wait a minute. Yes, farther out by the villa. I'm sorry, I don't have, Godfrey really hasn't been out to photograph there yet. This is a photograph from a tour we did last summer. Farther out by the villa, which would be very difficult to reach today unless you went by the road track, are three really large and important sculptures that, again, we would like to know more about. This one is Minerva, and it is a cast stone sculpture. Again, we think it's probably a copy, not an original antique sculpture, but a very handsome one, a very dramatic one, and we know from the photographs that it's been on the campus a long time. I really only have one other image to show you. Head cut off. Let's go back to the other one of Minerva. There are two others out there. There's the Justice, which carries on it the date 1867. And I'm being asked to finish up, so I will. Since I don't have any more images, that's not too difficult. And another one called Silva, which is very similar to Minerva, but seems to be a goddess, described as a goddess of mechanical arts. Again, we hope we will find out more as we look at them. Had only planned to finish up with a few images of things that are no longer with us, alas. One is the mermaid that was down in the Glen, which I think for the beautiful Glen on campus, very symbolic piece. We have no idea what happened to it. On the other hand, this eagle stood on Linden Lane and disappeared only within the last 10 years. So we have really a lot to look after on the campus. I know the Odeon, which of course we lost only recently, had a number of sculptures on it. Most of them were gone in recent times. This one, the ones on that side of the roof, that's on the music hall. last June, there was one remaining on the scenery building side of the Odeon Theater. That, alas, was lost in the Odeon fire. I guess she was waving goodbye in June. Thanks.
Yeah, the last statue that was left on the top of the Odeon, Linda's last slide, I was here shortly after that statue fell to the ground, and I have a piece of her skirt about this much left that's left of it. And I think one of our other board members has a hand, a foot, what do you have? A foot that's left of that piece of sculpture. So you see, sculpture, it's not just the buildings here, but it's the sculpture. And another important element that we are trying to preserve is the landscape. This is obviously a beautiful place, beautiful piece of property. And in fact, I don't know if you know, but this property is built on the Glen of Forest Glen. This is indeed the Glen, just right outside the door here is the actual Forest Glen. And we're going to have someone talk to you about the landscape and what SOS is doing about the landscape here. The person who has been most involved in preserving the landscape here is not able to be with us today. He's a landscape designer. He's speaking at the National Conference for Landscape Designers today. But in his place is another board member. Her name is Kate Fanning, and she is an architectural historian also. And she is, in addition to helping us with a lot of other things, is leading the, writing the application for this site to be a landmark site. As I told you before, this site is already on the National Register. It can, if a site has national significance, both historically, architecturally, it can then be given the rating of a landmark. And we feel that this site does have national significance, not just local. So Kay is leading the study of it to prepare a landmark application for this site. So I will introduce you to Kay.
Thanks, Bonnie. Just a few slides here. And first we'll show the property when it was just a resort inn, which, as you all know, is how it began before it was a school. This is a bridge that led from the railroad that was just called the Walk Bridge. It no longer stands, but you can see that when it was a resort inn, the main building was set back here among the trees, but landscape wasn't an important part. Landscape design wasn't really a consideration. It was just a building set among the woods. And then when the school was built, when the school was built, landscape became a very important part of the girls' recreation and also their education. And the landscape design was created to be small formal classical plots were set among the picturesque wooded landscape. They were set near buildings and at the intersections of paths and right around the main buildings. And there were places where the girls could study or visit, look out at the views, and they were to enhance their education, their classical education, give them a sense of being within a pastoral landscape. And what we've been doing is, and it's been one of our most successful invisible programs, is that the last few months, the board member John Saunier, whom Bonnie just mentioned, has organized a series of landscape cleanups. He's been working with Colonel Al Bergstrom of the Walter Reed Army Medical Center, who's based here. And John is a landscape gardener and designer with Guston Gardens in Gaithersburg, and he arranged with them to donate volunteer labor and materials and equipment along, and the Army did as well. And Colonel Bergstrom had been working on his own for a number of months, organizing just groups of Army personnel who in their own time, on their lunch hour, went out and started to clean up the landscape, started to clear paths and hack away weeds and brush and other debris. And so they got together and they said it would be a great way to get the community involved and show that we're really doing things here, cleaning up the landscape. We don't have all that many before and after photographs. We do have 34 photographs on the table here showing the two areas that they've targeted so far, because we've had two landscape cleanup days. The first was in October, and the area they chose to consider was, they're called the Villa Gardens. over here, there was a formal garden created here of lawns and retaining walls and urns, all set around the large figure of Justice, a seated figure of Justice. We have photographs of her here, unfortunately, no slides. And then the formal treatment of the landscape continued down the hill here towards the Glen. And John and the Colonel chose that as the site for the first intensive effort. And we advertised it, and about 50 people showed up. This was in October, and worked all day, and were able to clear the entire area. We do have a few, again, photographs there, and you can see it now that we got rid of all the brush and cleared some of the stairways that led down the Glen, and cleared the statue of Justice, which before had just loomed like this spectral image through the brush, and you couldn't see her at all, and now she stands free and clear. She's about 12 feet high, and it's quite grand, and it gives you a sense of what the gardens looked like, the gardens that were such an integral part of the school, and what they looked like originally when it was a school and populated by all the students. And this was so successful that we planned another one in December for let me just show you on a map too. This is a map from, I believe, the early 1940s, and shows most of the buildings as they are. This is the villa. This is the area where the villa gardens were created. And now I'm going to be talking about the garden cleanup we had in December, which was the Chateau Gardens. Linda's just shown you a few pieces that were in the Chateau Gardens, and they were designed in this glen right behind the Chateau Causeway, really behind the ballroom, running between the ballroom and the Odeon. And even though this was a very cold and rainy day, we did get a lot of people out, possibly 30, working in the rain and running up and down the hillside, clearing up brush and debris, and uncovering a great bit of the Chateau Gardens. That's just the general area, actually, looking from the villa. But these are the Chateau Gardens, and we cleared up most of these paths, a lot of little footbridges that went over the stream here, and this area, which was the focal point of the Chateau Gardens, where originally there had been a grassy plot surrounded by boxwood, which still exists. Half the boxwood are there, and they're now just enormous, but you can still see it, and all the paths are there. And the main point of the gardens was this enormous iron urn, which was always trumpeted in all the National Park Cemetery literature as the largest iron vase in the world, and it was quite a sight to see. We don't know what's happened to it. Apparently it was sold, auctioned off in the 40s when the school was sold. But there were a lot of little interludes like this in the gardens, little areas with classical statuary where, again, the girls could sit and study or just visit. And we cleared up most of this, and it was quite successful. The cleanup projects are wonderful because they don't require much money. They show immediate results. They've gotten the full cooperation of the Army. The Army is so pleased to have volunteer labor go out and take care of things. And they also give concrete evidence that the area is being watched over and maintained, and that we do care about it. And how it is handled is that John and the Colonel identify areas and decide on the work to be done, what trees are specimen trees and should be kept, and have things cleared away from them, and what are the landscape elements. And they direct teams of volunteers, whoever shows up. And uncovering these really does give us a sense of what the place was like in its heyday. We are planning a third one in March. We will give everyone ample notice of it, send out notices. A place hasn't been chosen yet, but one, and this, a second view of the Chateau Gardens, but one area that we are considering is the Glen between the grief of Actaeon statue, the Odeon site, and there were footpaths that ran down through the Glen towards the Villa Gardens, and in the Glen there were more little seating areas created, many footpaths. There was a little grotto, a stone grotto that shaped sort of like a beehive where the girls could go and sit. They were also surrounded by classical statuary there, so there were a lot of little special places all through the Glen, and some of those paths have been cleared, but there's a lot more work to be done. I believe that's at least one of the things that John is considering for March, and everyone will be notified. And as short a time as they want, whatever's convenient. And all materials are supplied, and we're anxious to have everyone come who can. It really is, I think, a good way to increase our visibility and to help maintain the property. So, and that's it. Thank you very much.
Does that inspire you to get out and march? It was absolutely amazing in December when it was raining all day. Several of you here I see were very dedicated hard workers, so it was great. And an incredible difference. I wish we had a before picture of the Chateau Gardens because you couldn't even see the arches of that causeway. You couldn't, they were totally covered with trees, vines. It was incredible. So we're real excited about, it'll probably be the end of March to go down, we hope, into the Glen and see what other path. We know now that the leaves are down, we can barely see the pathways, and we have maps, so we know where they're supposed to be. So it's really like a treasure hunt to find these paths. Well, that's sculpture, that's landscape. The other thing that probably is just as important, if not the most important, are the buildings. And unfortunately, this past September, we lost one of the more significant buildings on the site. And you may have heard it in the news, it was on TV and the newspapers, the loss of the Odeon. The Odeon was the theater for the school. And it sat at the end of this building. Look out these windows here and see what is not left. There's nothing left. It's to the ground. Unfortunately, it was arson. They found in the investigation. But we're going to talk and show you some pictures of the fire, and Richard Schaefer of our board is going to tell you about that. Rich is also one of the co-founders of Save Our Seminary, so he's been around for a number of years and knows the history of this site almost better than anybody I've ever met. He's setting up, he's got a videotape here of several news clips of the fire, so you can actually see the fire. But I'll let him take it from here.
Thank you, Bonnie. Just give me 1 minute here to set up. I'll begin shortly.
Rich is also a fireman, by the way, so he knows fires real well.
Okay, thanks, Bonnie. Once again, folks, my name is Richard Schaefer, and I just want to point out before I even start, in spring, myself and Linda Lyons offer tours of the site here. I believe it's $5 a person. We try to arrange it as a group on just about any weekend. And I don't know if there's still, are we $2.50 for members or $5 for everyone?
Pardon?
Is it $2.50 for members or $5 for everyone? With tours?
For tours, $5.
When we first started out, we didn't have any problems. As much money as we can through the tours. Now, mid-September of last year, I was coming home from work and received a call that one of my worst nightmares had come true, which was the burning of the Odeon Theater. I immediately came over here, not to find what I hoped, but unfortunately saw that the whole thing was completely burnt to the ground. I'm sure everyone here has seen the remains of the Odeon Theater. Actually, it hadn't burned that bad initially, but the fire department and the engineers wanted to take everything else that was standing around it down. So there were a few columns that were still standing. Some of the walls and some of the foundation were still standing, but the Army cleared the rest of it. And I believe to this day it still hasn't been removed from the site. There's still quite a bit of foundation stone and rubble, whatever was left over from the fire. Most of the early footage was taken by a gentleman who sells his footage to the Associated Press, so it was hard to get access to to the actual fire footage. We don't have much in this, but there'll be some in another tape we're going to show in a few minutes here. Let me set my watch so I don't go into too much time. I'm going to fast forward some as we're seeing some of the scenes. Primarily on this tape, there's three important things. There's an interview with Chief Glen of the Silver Spring Fire Department who gives an almost immediate opinion that it was arson. With the amount of fire that was there, the way it was discovered, the time of day, it was a weekend, it was pretty clear that at that time it had been an arson fire. Now, I worked with the Montgomery County Fire Marshal's office for about 2 years before I quit Montgomery County, went to the DC Fire Department. I'm working with the fire marshal now. We've got a good lead on who some of the kids were that did this. And hopefully by May, we'll have an arrest. What was the motive? The weekend. You know, the kids have been in there continually, spray painting, drinking beer. There's been another fire set about a month prior to this fire in one of the wings of the building. That's still standing, but you can see the damage that that fire caused. This is just showing the absolute devastation of the place. It's ironic. This is Tower 1 at the Silver Spring Fire Department. It's interesting to note that the first looking ladder that Silver Spring had was a truck run back in 1930. Came out to this site 64 years ago, almost to the day of this fire. But they didn't come out to the fire. They came out to put the ladder up to the ballroom because at the time the ballroom was a tall story in front of the tent. We're gonna skip through this a little bit and go up to the first interview. Folks, if there's any questions, feel free to ask them, including history. And I'll take some history questions after the report.
I should mention that Rich is our official tour guide for this site. And I said he knows most of it, better history more than anyone else. I think that's ice.
Yeah, it's ice. Not a good sound. This is the state fire marshals and the county fire marshals, as well as the Army CID who came in to conduct the investigation. It did take several days before they realized that, well, they made clear the cause of the fire. This is Ben Smith, folks, who's about to be interviewed. Ben's a PAO officer here at Forest Glen, and he says some interesting things. You can hear it. I'll turn it over.
PA means public affairs.
Public Affairs Officer.
Tell me about this building. What's the historic nature of this?
It was the Odeon Theater. It's one of a number of historical buildings here at the Forest Glen Annex. They stood back around the turn of the century. This was an old girls' school.
This lady here, I'm going to turn it over to her.
Tell me what you
She was the one who found the fire. She found the fire at 7 a.m. when she was coming in to relieve the personnel who had done the night watch. The fire marshal's office believes that the fire started probably around midnight the previous night, burned all night long, and when she came in at 7 a.m. discovered the fire. The buildings were all mostly wood construction, so it may have smoldered for some time before it actually lit up and took the whole building with it. But she was the one who found it. There's one other interview here I want you to hear, and that's Chief Flynn of the Silver Spring Fire Department. He gives a pretty good account of what happened. Well, that's mine. We're not going to listen to that. It was a rough morning for me. Let's see. But I more or less make clear one important thing, and that was what was on Channel 4 News when they did my interview, was that the sprinkler system here, which was a Grinnell sprinkler system that was installed in the 30s and updated during the Army period in the 50s, was inoperative. It's a dry sprinkler system, which means that it's filled with air. When a fire erupts, the sprinkler head opens up, all the air rushes out, and the system fills with water and puts the fire out. Well, something had gone wrong with the air pressure, so the Army shut the system down completely. And there's reason to believe that if the sprinkler system was working, it was a really good system, that this building would have saved. So it's just, as the neglect of the Army. This is Chief Flynn, and this is where we'll finish this tape up after his interview.
Chief, tell me what the situation was when you first arrived here at the city.
We received an alarm about 7 a.m. for a report of building fire at the Walter Reed Medical Complex in Forest Glen. On our unit's arrival, we found that the building was a commercial radio and Greek theater and flame brought the fire on all 3 floors. Our immediate concern was how can we confine the fire and keep it to the building of origin. We did so by saying that the building has been vacant for quite some time, and as such, all the utilities, including the water, have been shut off of the system.
1901. The trolley system came into Forest Glen. It was chartered by Dr. Cassidy, who was the owner of the school here, in the late 1890s. The reason Cassidy brought the trolley to Forest Glen was not so the girls could ride back and forth to Washington. They weren't allowed to ride the trolley. He brought the trolley to Forest Glen because with the trolley came electricity. In 1901, when the Odeon was built, it was the first building to have electricity on the site, thus making one of the most important theaters in Montgomery County. So big it had electricity. And I brought a lot of photographs in as well. I think Linda mentioned we had some stuff here, but I brought a lot of things in that's on the that are on the table over there in the corner.
Rick,
And we'll look at that.
Rick, you said to ask questions.
Sure.
In your investigation of the Odeon fire, are you looking into what the possible connection to the burning down of the Forest Glen store across the beltway?
The Forest Glen store, the country store, which some of you may know, was proved to be accidental, not malicious. They found that a refrigerator compressor motor on one of the refrigerators there had gone bad, overheated through the night and just smoldered and eventually lit up. I tell you, that building is 90% original, so it's very crusty, as we may say. And it went up real quick. It's a sad loss. But Pete said he's going to rebuild it. He's the owner of the place, so hopefully we'll
To
see
the right,
it.
Mike, you can show them that they didn't even have time to get one of the cars out of the garage. One lady told us a story today about being...
Folks, this next is a short little segment that Channel 5 ran on the site. And this is just from
Up north of here,
Bear with me, we'll start in a minute.
and hearing somebody say something about evacuating.
Oh, wait. I'm going to play this tape first. What this is
Fire up north of here, 1,000.
is the Montgomery County Crime Solvers ran a story on the fire here on Channel 9 News at noon. I'm not sure what the date is, I'll probably say it. But Bonnie was interviewed in it. And they'll make mention of a reward that's being offered to find the culprit who set the fire. But I'll mention it again once this is done.
Say something about evacuating. She thought it was on TV, and she realized it was right outside the front door.
The arsonist. That's this week's Crime Solvers case from Montgomery County. Joining us now, Corporal George Ludington, the Montgomery County Police, and Bonnie Rosenthal, president of Save Our Seminary Committee. George, what happened?
Questions we don't have the time for, but essentially it's just a small little talk about Forest Glen that Fox Channel 5 ran a couple weeks ago. And anyone who's interested in after Ward speaks, who's the next speaker, interested in seeing it, then we'll show it later after our presentation. Are there any questions about the interview?
I have a question about the walking tours that you're giving. How do we find out about them when they'll be?
And you can give either myself or Bonnie a call.
Right. We'll also put notices about the tours in the local paper in the Post section, the Maryland section of the Post. Thank you, Rich.
You're welcome.
What we're going to do is start a regular program of tours of the site in the spring when the weather's better, whether every month or every other month, and we'll put it in the Post and the Montgomery Journal, the Gazette, and watch for that. And also for neighborhood groups, the surrounding neighborhoods, we send notices to the community associations so they're aware of it. And if they have newsletters, they can get the word out too. Thanks. Unfortunately, that was a sad, sad day for this site. And you think this site is now 100 years old, and that was the first building lost. There was one other building lost to termites, but other than that, this was only the second building lost in 100 years. Our next speaker is Ward Booker. Ward is a restoration architect, and he's on our board, and we're very lucky to have him because a lot of the preservation work here is of a technical nature, of course, and to have his expertise is very helpful. Ward's going to talk briefly about the other buildings that are still standing, and as you may have noticed, are deteriorating rapidly. So I will turn this over to Ward.
Thanks, Bonnie. I'm going to be brief. I know we've had a lot of speakers here today. The other buildings that Bonnie mentioned, there's a total of, well, depending on how you count, about 24 buildings that are part of the core area within the historic district. The original campus site was over 170 acres of are some buildings that aren't within the historic district. There are over some stables and barns and so forth, spring houses, a number of buildings that are no longer within the core historic area. But within this area, I say there's 24 depending on how you count, because a lot of them have been connected since they were first built, so that you could walk almost literally between every building on site. There's only a few isolated ones, which are the original sorority houses. But what I've been working on, and what in fact SOS has been working on since its founding, particularly, is the stabilization of the buildings on the site. And what does stabilization mean? Well, that's protecting the buildings from being destroyed while you're waiting to get them restored to tip-top condition. And it could involve things like preventing arson, the issue we saw today. Could be things like keeping the weather out. We have buildings on campus that have giant holes in the roof, and when I say giant, more than 12 feet across. And others that have smaller holes that are getting bigger over time. And also, preventing the actual decay of the buildings beyond reasonable hope of restoring them. So we've been taking two tracks on that over time. Our initial track was to say to the Army, gee, you really ought to do this job. They're actually legally required to do that if you have a historic site, and this 17 acres is on the National Register, as Bonnie mentioned. So it's their legal obligation to do that. We thought perhaps it was simply a matter of saying to them, hey, let's do that. After several years of going through many avenues, assistance from Connie Morella, our Congresswoman, and National Trust for Historic Preservation, many avenues we tried to get the Army to do that. And they really haven't addressed those major issues. The buildings that have been occupied have been reasonably well maintained, but the ballrooms, you can see we're in now, although it has lost parts over the years, and other buildings are continuing to lose parts. The other avenue we pursued is actually doing some of this work ourselves. This past fall, we did an emergency stabilization study to identify those parts of the site that need help most badly. And we've also gotten a lot of volunteer efforts. Both of our members and Home Depot this past fall donated a substantial amount of materials. You can see that there's a lot of windows that have been boarded up on the ground floor. We were hoping to paint them as well, board them up, but the weather caught up with us, and we've also had some volunteers that had planned to come in January from Winchester Homes, but the weather again has prevented us from getting that moving forward. So we're pursuing those two avenues. One is to try and get the Army to take care of this. As it was earlier mentioned, sometime in the next couple of years, the property will go from the Army to some future user. And what we're trying to do is just get the property protected and maintained enough so they'll still be here for the future user to use them. And so those two avenues we're pursuing, we've been partially successful. There are some of the more major areas in terms of getting these big holes in the roof. We have not yet been successful, but we're continuing to pursue that. So that is, in summary, our stabilization program. Bonnie, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that. Any questions?
Yeah, I want to, one other important thing that people might, as I mentioned before, that what's going to happen here next. The county, or the Army, has contracted with the county, and the county has then contracted with an outside consultant team to do an alternative use study for this site, which must be conducted in the process for the Army to get rid of the property. And that study is starting this month. It's going to take 9 to 12 months. That team is going to put together 2 to 5 different viable uses for this site. That's their goal, is to look at all kinds of alternatives and measure them from an economics, a historical, and environmental standpoint and see what is the most successful use for this site. SOS is part of the advisory committee that will feed into that study. So and we want to bring in the community input, and there will be public meetings for the community to respond to the results of the study. And there will be a couple of public meetings during the study going on. So that's another important role that
And when's the first meeting?
The first meeting, well, the meeting of the committee is the end of this month. But
So it'll be perhaps sometime in the spring when it'll be public meeting?
community meetings, I would think by spring, late spring. Yeah. So, and you will be, all communities, surrounding communities will be notified. They'll probably put public notice in the paper.
There's a question here?
Yeah. Do you have any kind of a ballpark figure, if somebody comes in and buys this property, what it's going to take them to restore it?
Well, it's in the neighborhood of $20 million and up, depending on what the future use is. There's a couple 100,000 square feet of space here. That's an inexact number because nobody knows exactly how much, but there's a lot of space and a lot to be done.
Now, would that include all the other buildings that were used as sororities, or just?
That's the whole property. Everything from Linden Lane, the border, Linden Lane, as far as the gymnasium, if you know that building with the big columns, and that, and including all the rest from there on coming north is included.
It goes from Linden Lane over to Smith Drive, which is almost at the railroad tracks, but that's that driveway that goes by the warehouse, and it goes back to the Beltway and connects Linden Lane again. So that's essentially the area. Now, there are a few buildings that are outside the historic district, like the Miller Library, that were originally part of the campus, but they're not part of the area that currently is being considered in terms of the Army giving them.
Yes.
Does it look like all the buildings will be able to be restored, or some have to be restored?
Well, one of the reasons for doing the study is to deal with those very issues. Certainly, they all can be restored, but you're going to have to judge the future proposed use against the usability of the buildings for those uses. Most of them, not all of them, but most of them are wood frame buildings, and today's building code doesn't permit all uses within wood frame buildings. For example, you couldn't have it as a nursing home, just to throw out an example, because the structure of the buildings aren't adaptable to that. Yes, sir?
Even more rapidly eroding maybe than the buildings are the memories of the people who were here. Is any effort being made to capture the memories of those people?
Indeed,
That's
there
the
is.
next thing on our program. Yes, indeed. That can be a lead in, and we didn't plan to. Yes, thanks for it very much. Yes, in fact, it is. It's not just buildings and landscape and the real physical fabric here, but it's the memories, right? The people who were here. And it's not just the girls either. It's 50 years of Army life. And we're very lucky to have, in fact, almost half of SOS membership are alumni of the school. There are several hundred still surviving alumni. They're spread all over the country. The youngest is probably 70.
Maybe a little younger.
Maybe a little younger. Okay, that's right. That's right. The oldest alumni just died the end of October. She was 111. She would have been 112 in January. Unfortunately, she didn't see that. But she was still pretty bright and alert and was concerned about what was going to happen here. So we were sorry to lose her. But yes, we are, in fact, our next two speakers and the last speakers on our program are alumni of the school who are board members of SOS. And they will talk a little bit about this year being the 100th year of the school and what they do every year, a reunion. We're also, at that reunion, I'll just mention, we're going to start a formal oral history program with the alumni. This may be one of the last times that we'll ever have a chance to sit down with a lot of these women. There's, what, 200, 300, 400? Oh, there's at least.
We have a bulletin, and everybody has to belong to that, but we have someone who has every
like to introduce you first to June Saylor. June, what's your maiden name? June Ryder Saylor, okay. That's how the girls know her. And June is class of 1938. 1932.
No, thank you, I'm not that old. I'm one of the youngest members.
She is the last class of the school. Last class, because the Army.
But maybe it's going to be revived because maybe it's going to be another school that's going to take over. We're hoping that's one of the alternate uses. In 1978, when I was attending American University to get a master's in historic preservation, which is another reason I'm interested in the site, I wrote a paper for an economics class on alternate uses. You see how long it takes to get around to doing something? But hopefully something will happen. But I think Bonnie asked me to talk about the 100th anniversary of the school. And you've heard a lot about it, so I'll cut what I said I was going to say and say that one of our things is to have a reunion in May 18 to 21. And we have a group of plans for the people. And we discussed on Thursday at a meeting at my home, which I couldn't believe people came to considering the weather. People will arrive on Thursday and there will be a reception at the Embassy of Taiwan, which is free China, and then a dinner at the Chevy Chase Club. And a friend of mine, Helen Thomas, who's the White House correspondent for UPI, is going to talk not about the school but about what's going on in Washington. And then we'll have a tour on Friday morning to two historic places downtown and a luncheon at the Army Navy Country Club, courtesy of the Gays, arranging. Then more tours, and Friday night, one of the other local members has arranged that the Naval Officers Club will have a dinner. And on Saturday, we'll finally get around to, after a meeting, having a tour of the schools. And we've decided that we'll have two guides on the buses here to give them history. And then they'll come in and we'll have oral interviews. One of our active members here, who doesn't appear too often because she's 94, Helen Klein, graduated in the class of 1921 or 23, between those times, and lives on Primrose Street in Chevy Chase, in a house she's lived in for 60 years. I've done an oral interview with her, and I talked recently to a DAR group and the Questers and learned of two more people called them. One lady was so excited, she said, I'm 82 and I went in 1930, and I'm so excited to learn this thing is still going. So I hope she's going to come. And another lady who works at NIH that was in the class that I was. When I visited a friend from the school out in Portland, Oregon this summer, I learned about the lady from NIH. So I hope she's going to appear. So we're, trying to get our act together. But there's so much to do, and it would seem so little time to do because the place is falling apart. And we need everybody's help. Anybody that's interested, please help us. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell them we have speakers, wonderful speakers that will come and share with them, like Rich and Linda. And so please spread the word, and any civic group you have that would like to hear our story, we'd love to get everybody in Maryland involved in the whole country. It's a wonderful historic preservation project. Thank you.
In addition to the tours that Rich gives, and Linda also is giving, we do have a slideshow, a historical slideshow. It tells the whole history of the site, and that's what June was referring to in the slideshow, which several of our board members have given several talks to community groups, and that's something I'd like to start on a more regular basis too, because some people are not able to go out and take on tours, and yet the slideshow will show them everything. The last speaker is Gwendolyn Gay, Gwendolyn Mauser Gay. She is class of 1938, and also
Awfully young for there, but
right, and she is the woman who is organizing she is the liaison for the Alumni Association.
Me too.
Both, and husband, Jesse. In addition to being our board member, Gwen is also coordinating the liaison with the alumni group to come here and plan the reunion. And I like her, in addition to what else I think she's going to explain what they call their reunion and what that means. Gwen?
yes. Thank you. I was awfully interested. Did you read this in the last National Historic?
Oh, letter
Where
to
the
the
Army brother said in, his sister had been here, and said he felt this place was in worse shape than any other Army place he visited. His sister thought it was so beautiful. She was here in the early days when the Army took over. So it isn't just the people of Forest Glen or the alumni. It is the Army people that enjoyed your Odeon and enjoyed everything. It is not something that it belonged to the Carols of Maryland before the hotel was built here. So it's for everyone. But anyway, house party, there was always, like I think there are in all fine schools, but I know this school best, because my mother and her sisters went here, is at graduation time, all of the alumnus would come in. And if you say you were here, my mother, when I graduated, had a lovely room down below, and the whole place was just teeming with older people who loved this school. And I think the thing that is unique about National Park is the fact that probably it's been why it's had the problems it's had, is the fact that it is out in the country. Because the Navy took over Mount Vernon, but Mount Vernon could move, and Mount Vernon still looks beautiful because it's right on Ontario Avenue, the original Mount Vernon, whereas we're out in the woods. That's what makes it so beautiful. But to get back to the thesis of house party, we called our reunions house party, a house party. And Starkey, who's sort of been the one who's kept us kicking us all the time, keep going, keeps every file, said how it evolved into all one house party. You don't even say D anymore. Who knows? It's like the phrases we coined when we were at school. Something seemed trendy and cute, and we did it. But it is something remarkable that for 50 years we cared enough about this place and that you all care about, because it's part of your neighborhood, that we have a house party every year in a different part of the country. And I will be happy to answer any questions. I don't want to talk too long. But I would like to introduce my co-partner, Jesse. Has been he has been working on the deck with me. I couldn't have done for the house party, which may be our swan song. Not that we won't continue to have our bulletin, but it may be our swan song as far as going around the country is concerned. Will they wait to see what they vote on? I don't know what they're going to do. I'm on the board. I have no idea what they're going to do. But this will be our 100th birthday, and we're trying to plan a great time. And I think that Jesse, you did want to say something about the Naval Officers Club, about if people wanted to come, didn't you?
Come in.
Please.
I think the members of SOS are welcome to any of the affairs that we're conducting. I'm not going to give you a schedule, but I think June covered it pretty thoroughly. On Friday night, we're having a dinner at the Bethesda Officers Club, and at that dinner, we want Bonnie to sort of set the stage for the next day, which will be devoted to coming out here and having a presentation by SOS, and I think they're going to try to have tea at the end of it. And Bonnie will give an address there, a short address, and after that we have the main speaker of the evening, the Brigadier General Elizabeth Poisington, who was the first Army general in the WAFs. But anybody would be very welcome to come to that evening dinner, and
light? Does that go down to 2 lux?
I wonder